So many of us take time to try and keep our bodies strong. Maybe we have a Y membership through our health insurance program. Maybe we have a personal trainer. Maybe we like to go hiking or play pickleball. I did just notice in the AARP magazine there was a whole article on how not to hurt yourself playing pickleball. If we join a gym, we often start super strong. We sign up for a whole bunch of classes and we're super committed and we maybe overdo it. Maybe within 10 days we're sore and possibly injured because we did too much too fast. One of the stories that Jesus told as part of his teaching in the book of Mark was about a farmer who was spreading seeds. And some of them fell on a pathway and they never grew at all. Some of them fell on the stony soil and they took off really fast but then fizzled out quickly because they didn't have very good roots. Some of them were in thorny soil and they had some pretty good roots, but they had a lot of competition for water and sunlight, and their plant just never grew very strong. And then there was the good stuff. The plants that were bearing lots of fruit, 30 to 1, 60 to 1, 100 to 1 yields. And they had strong roots, they had strong plants, life was good. This sounds a lot like going to the gym. Do we take the time to develop strong roots, a strong foundation, a strong base for adding more skills and activities? Or do we go, do too much too fast and flame out because we didn't have enough support? Last week we talked about the spiritual practice of prayer and how Jesus taught his followers to be in regular conversation with God, kind of like adding fertilizer to the soil so that you know that the roots will grow strong. This week, I want to take a look at our spiritual practice of growing with a group, of small group study. Now, our video was a great reminder of the power of being in a group. Our readings today, as we went through there, we saw that throughout the book of Mark, Jesus is with groups of people. He's bringing people together. In the first story, there were so many people they couldn't even fit in the house. They were flowing out all over the place. Other times, he told stories, and everyone was glad there was a group there because, to be honest, they really weren't sure what Jesus was talking about. I often like to be smug, thinking, I would have figured it out, but if I'd been back there, I wouldn't have had any clue what was going on either. Jesus went from place to place. He was always teaching. He was always gathering people together. He interpreted sections of the Hebrew Bible in new ways. He told them new stuff that they didn't understand, especially that whole part about dying and rising again. I mean, when you haven't been through Easter, what did that mean? Don't you always feel better having someone next to you to go, I don't know what's going on. Can you help me? He invited people to have strength and commitment to take up a cross, and he knew we would have more strength if we had people with us. So then the question is, do any of us feel like we are strong enough to pick up the cross that Jesus is challenging us with? And my guess is the answer is no. And I'm guessing that many of us feel inadequate to the task that Jesus is inviting us to take on. And I'm guessing that's true because it's how I used to feel. I have not always been a pastor. I know it's hard for you to imagine because you've only known me as a pastor. I didn't become a pastor until I was 45, which was yesterday. It was never my plan. It was not something I thought about or dreamed about. I've known people that knew they were going to be a pastor from childhood, like my sister, but it wasn't me. I was sitting in the pews, just like you guys, trying to figure out what was going on and what God wanted. Now, I grew up Lutheran, and in my family, you were required to go to a Lutheran college for college. No questions, absolute. Any college in the country as long as it was Lutheran. I picked Valparaiso University in Indiana. I was required to take 3 theology classes to graduate. One summer I was home. My parents, while I had graduated from high school here in Wisconsin, my parents, while I was in college, decided to move to Texas. So I'm home at their new house in Texas for the summer, And my mom was in some Sunday school class, and they had a retired professor who was in leading. It was one of those like walk through the Bible types of classes. And mom's like, oh, come along, this will be fun. So we went to worship, and I went with her to this class. And we're sitting there, and this guy's like, oh, you go to Valparaiso? I said, yeah. He's like, oh, well, I've got a great question for you. And he asked me this really convoluted, complicated Bible question. And he ends it by saying, with what you've learned at college, this one should be easy for you. And I looked at him, and I looked at my mother, and all I could think of was, what did you get me into? I had no idea what the guy was asking me. I had no idea what the answer was. I frankly felt pretty humiliated sitting there. And, you know, it's not like I knew the people at this church very well, because my parents had moved down there when I was in college. I only saw them over breaks. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what it seemed like I should know. So I was embarrassed. It was not a great moment. I can't remember that I ever went back to that class the rest of the summer. Now, after I married my husband, Park, we looked around for a church to join, and that's when we became United Methodist. I think I was about 29 at that point. We picked this United Methodist church because they had a lot of kids. And we were growing our family at the time, and we wanted Sunday school youth groups for our kids. We take the kids, drop them off in their classes, and then there was one class on Sunday morning for the grown-ups. So we went, because it was called the young adult class. Now, we were 29, 30 years old. Obviously, we belonged in the young adult class. We started going. We went a few weeks. Nice people, lovely conversation. But after a few weeks, suddenly they had a big conversation during class about whether they should really still be called the young adult class. Because they were all baby boomers, and they were all 45 to 60 at the time. And they're like, do we still count as young adults? They decided they felt young, so they could keep the name young adults. I will say the pastor was not impressed, because he knew this was not helpful to the young adults that they were trying to bring into the church. So the pastor started a new group, and I joined that new group. And I learned a lot. I loved the conversations. And then one day, I got a phone call. And I got a phone call from what churches used to have was called a Sunday school superintendent. And that person was in charge of finding teachers for everything. They called me. I was like 31 years old with babies at home. They called and said, we've got a book we want you to teach, Celebration of Discipline. I said, celebration of what? I said, I don't know anything. I can't do this. After much arm twisting, they roped me into it. And I have to say, I learned more because I had to teach it to someone else than I ever would have learned if I was just trying to teach myself. And that experience changed my life, and I've been teaching all sorts of stuff ever since. Now, at the same time, my husband was a little erratic in attending church. We owned a computer consulting firm, and so he often worked on Sundays because his clients' offices were closed, so he can go in and mess around with their computers, fixing them, of course. And so I was often at church alone, and when he did come, he didn't really feel like he fit into any of the groups that we had meeting at church. And there was another young adult family with little kids, and that dad didn't come to church very often either. He was a farmer. And so the two of them went and they bought a Bible called the Serendipity Bible. And this Bible is great because it's the whole Bible, but in the margins, it has discussion questions. So they didn't have to research anything. They didn't have to do any homework. They bought a few of these. They stuck them on the top of the coat rack in the hallway. And once all the kids and the wives were off to their classes, the dads went and they'd pick up these Bibles off the coat rack, and they'd walk a block over to the restaurant and have sausage biscuits and coffee while they did their Bible study. They were pretty happy. Now, Park then eventually became a pastor, and eventually down the road, I did too. But I want to make one thing clear as we go on here. Joining a group to learn more about Jesus does not mean you're going to become a pastor. Please do not worry that that's the only pathway out there. Just because it happened to my husband and I does not mean it's going to happen to you. But being part of a group, which I was a part of for 20 years before I became a pastor, it means that we are open to God working in us and changing us with the support of other believers. Now, our church has been developing a spiritual pathway because we want to make sure that we're making progress, helping people grow as followers of Jesus, as disciples of Jesus. And our pathway has been inspired by the paths, the hiking trails in our community. So when we're starting out, we often think about 4 levels of physical growth: infants, children, teens, and adults. And we have 4 stages of spiritual growth too. At the beginning, we're just checking things out. So maybe we're at the trailhead, just taking a look, seeing how things are going to be. And then maybe we finally decide we're ready to take a few steps. We're going to maybe do a short little hike at the beginning. Later on, we realize there's a lot more to see and we want to go a lot further. And then finally, we're ready to attain heights we didn't know we could reach, kind of like me teaching this class. And we realize that not only have we grown for ourselves, but we're now at a point where we can help others grow. Now, I didn't think I was there when I got the call to teach this class, but through teaching others, I became more spiritually mature. I gained more confidence. I started feeling less inadequate when retired professors asked me random questions. Now, when I go to a gym and I do a class with others, it works a lot better because if it was up to me, after about 10 minutes of lifting weights, I feel like I have done enough. And I am out of there. Oh, it's maybe time to go to the treadmill now. But if I'm in a class, I might stick through it for the whole 45 minutes, right? I am stronger when I have the support of the people around me. Maybe a little bit of peer pressure, maybe a little competitiveness, but I do better when I'm in a class at the gym. Now this weekend, as I said, I was at a retreat with our confirmation students, and there were about 85 students and chaperones and clergy there from around the state. And we were talking about our Wesleyan heritage. We were started by the Wesley brothers in the 1700s, and they're the ones that created the method of growing as Christian followers of Jesus, people being strong enough to take up a cross and follow Jesus. And one of the key methods of our tradition was actually having small groups. Now, back in the day, they were called bands and societies and classes, but this was where Methodists met. They had a small group they met with every week. They served their community together, they studied the Bible, they confessed their sins to each other, they collected their offerings, they grew as disciples together. And that was the primary meeting place. In fact, if you wanted to go to worship and have communion, you had to go to your small group first, and then you get a little token that you could hand in to be able to get communion. Now, just to make it really clear, our communion table is open. It doesn't matter what you've done during the week. If you want the grace of Jesus, you can come, and you do not need to give me a token for your Bible study class. But after World War II, in many of our churches, we started putting more emphasis on Sunday morning worship. An hour in the pew, you're covered for the week. You don't need anything else. And that became pretty popular. But over this time, we've really seen our churches dwindle, and we've seen a lot of people start to feel more inadequate. We've started seeing believers who don't feel like they know enough and aren't strong enough to do all that God is asking them to do. So as we think about our history, and as we look at what has been the time-tested methods of growing as a disciple of Jesus Christ, I'd like to encourage us to go back to our tradition of all of us being part of a small group in addition to going to worship. Now, some of us have crazy lives, and sometimes it's easier to just go to one of our retreats, get a whole bunch done on a weekend instead of being part of a weekly class. We are trying to offer more varieties of options. But if we need to simply start some new groups to fit your life, we need to do that too. But I'd like to just quickly go over what I have seen from being part of a number of churches through the years as being the strongest way of having a small group ministry in a church, and the type of group that we should be looking at for us to grow. On the next slide, we see the 4 parts of the spiritual pathway, but these statements at the bottom in the boxes help us see what it is like in our area of studying to become like Jesus at the different levels. So our first level, I understand more about Jesus' teaching through my own reading. I pick up something here and there, maybe a magazine article, maybe something on the internet, maybe a podcast, and I learn a little something and it's nice. At the second level, we accept the call to be a follower of Jesus and commit ourselves to being part of a church, and we try to find new ways to become and bless like Jesus. At the third level, we're daily seeking to apply the teaching of Scripture to our own life and growing with a defined group of believers. We have committed to another group, and we know their names, just like the old Cheers song, and we come together to take care of each other in our groups. And the fourth level is not only am I growing, but I am working with God to be open to Jesus and obedient to Jesus and help others grow as well. So in a 3B group, on the next slide, the first part of a 3B group is belonging. When we think about Jesus' invitation at the beginning of Mark, when he was gathering his followers, he said, "Come, follow me. You, come, follow me." Jesus knew our names, which means we should know the names of the people who are looking to follow Jesus and grow with Jesus. So we want to belong to a group. We want to have a list of people that are part of our group that we're keeping track of. This is our first line of caring for each other. If someone's sick, your group is the first ones to deliver the hot dish to your house and make sure the snow is shoveled, although not so much of a problem this winter. So belonging is the first thing that a lot of us are looking for, and the first thing that Jesus is offering. On our next slide, we want to become like Jesus. Jesus said, "Come, follow me, and I will make you." Jesus wants to transform us, to make us more like himself so we can serve the world as Jesus served. So every 3B group is taking some time to study. Now, on the table in the fellowship hall, I have put out a bunch of the videos and a bunch of the books that I have used with different groups over the last 20 or 30 years of my life. Maybe something there will be inspiring to you. There is one set of videos in particular that has been transformative for me. These were all filmed on location in the Holy Land, and I used the information of this to get through seminary. These videos helped me understand the Bible more and be able to read more. But the group, as we come together, we are trying to become like Jesus. Now, each group has a different purpose. Some groups are mostly focused on serving the community. Maybe they just take 10 minutes of studying together and then they go and clean the Lydia house for the Ecumenical Partnership for Housing or something else. Other groups may be more focused on study when they gather, but every group should take some time to become more like Jesus. And finally, the third B is that Jesus blessed the world through his work in the community. He healed people, he fed people, he saw the people who were marginalized and ostracized. Because the final part of his invitation was, "Come, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Now, we talked a couple weeks ago, I'm a terrible fisher person. I have no future in this whatsoever. Jesus wasn't trying to make us specifically fishing folk. But what he wanted is that we were going into the community, we were gathering people together, we were meeting people, and we were serving our neighbors in love. Now, 3B groups that I've seen that are really successful at other churches are groups that every one of the groups, every other month, every 8 weeks, tries to find some sort of activity off church property out in the community where they go out and they're meeting people and they're serving people. Maybe it's handing out water bottles at a parade. Maybe it's volunteering at the zoo. I know this week we had a group of people went to Feeding America together and served together. It doesn't matter, but can you imagine what a church would look like if most of our people were in a small group and every small group every other month was out in the community doing something? It would change us and it would change our communities. So I just want to close to remind us that as we read through Mark, Jesus does almost no one-on-one tutoring. This is not about a one-to-one relationship. Jesus gathered people together as groups. These groups could grow in faith and action because groups can encourage and support each other in the good times as well as the tough times. Just like my own experience, being part of a group is not about having all the answers, because there were certainly times I did not have all the answers, and while sometimes it seems like I have all the answers now, there are still things I do not know. There are areas where some of you know more than I do. We aren't in a group to have the answers, and it's not about being strong by ourselves. It's about strength in numbers. It's about being on the ice floe together, helping each other when the tough times come. It is walking together and helping each other carry the cross that Jesus is giving us. So I invite you, don't walk alone, find a group. If you need support to getting into a group, let me know. We'll see which group that we currently have that you can fit in. I've already started talking to some people about trying to get some new groups going that meet at different times with different focus so that we have more variety, so that we can have a place for everyone to belong.